Hey everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my How to Create a Great Tone series for our Line 6 Helix. I did a recent episode of this series, something I hadn't done in a while, just earlier this week. And I thought I came up with another idea actually for another part after numerous discussions with a few folks online concerning their delays, okay? And I've done videos in the past in this series about dialing in delays, but there's one topic that I wanted to talk a little bit more about as I got speaking with a few folks and thinking about possible solutions to some of the issues some folks were having. For instance, I've heard a few people say that, no matter what they do, they can't seem to get their delay to kind of sit right in the mix, right? They either turn it down too much and they can't really hear it, or they turn it up to a point where they can hear it, but they're still not happy with it. And it got me thinking, I was like, well, there's gotta be a happy middle ground. I've never seemed to really have that problem. I can find that spot where I'm happy with it. It's kind of dialed in where I need it to be, and it just sits nicely in the mix. So I was wondering, what could be the problem? And the other thing I see a lot of folks talk about when they talk in terms about how they're dialing in their sounds, I'll hear a lot of folks talk about setting their delays to, 450 milliseconds, 600 milliseconds, 800 milliseconds, whatever setting they choose. And I always find that a little bit strange and puzzling. Keep in mind, the stuff I'm about to tell you here is my opinion and the way I like to work. There is no one right way. So this is my opinion. Some folks may disagree, and that's fine, but this is just what I have found to work for myself live in the studio and otherwise over the years. And what I'm talking about here, and the whole topic of this video, is utilizing the tap tempo function, or at least the ability to set the tempo in our Helix for our delays, as many units have. It's not unique to the Helix by any stretch of the imagination. And then dialing our delays in not so much by the number of milliseconds we want our repeats to be, but rather to a musical note value. Do we want it to be a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, a sixteenth, a dotted half note, And there's going to be some specific situations where it needs to be dialed into a particular note for it to work. You think of some of these kind of bouncy, Nuno Betancourt, Flight of the Wounded Bumblebee, that's going to have a very specific delay setting at a very specific tempo. So the thing I find funny is when we dial in a delay using simply milliseconds, there's no guarantee that that particular time setting or number of milliseconds is going to have any musical correlation, or should I say a musical correlation that works nicely with the music we're playing. And really any song we do, because of the varying tempo, is probably going to need a slightly different setting, in my opinion, right? So what I have always done, and one of the biggest tricks I could share with some folks if they're having a hard time maybe getting the delays to sit properly, is always try to time your delays to the tempo of the song you're playing. And that's the beauty of the tap tempo function, right? Because some people might say, well, I'm not playing to a click track when I'm playing live, right? We're just playing to however the band plays, what the drummer's doing, right? And the beauty of the tap tempo is we could tap tempo that tempo in numerous times throughout the same song. If we found that we've sped up by the time the first chorus comes around, just re-tap the tempo in and you're gonna be good. You can do that a number of times and that's gonna work out quite nicely. So that's a great feature. If you're in the studio and you know that you're playing a song that's been played to a click track at 132 beats per minute, we can simply set the tempo to 132 beats per minute and off we go, right? And it's gonna be locked in there because the tempo is not fluctuating. All right. So I want to give you some examples of how this sounds and how we can set up our Helix to maybe better fit the mix with our delays without always just having to go and turn up the mix control or turn down the mix control. Maybe we can get it to sit nicer in the mix just by having it match the tempo closer. So let's take a look. So let's go over to the computer screen here, first of all. And I want to show you guys a website just for some folks who maybe haven't thought of this. But here's this website by a site called guitargearfinder.com. And here's the URL up here if anybody's interested. And what it does is it gives a BPM to milliseconds calculator. So we can simply go up here, we can enter the beats per minute. So let's say I put 120, and it tells me then that a quarter note So one beat is going to be 500 milliseconds. A dotted eighth note is going to be 375 milliseconds. Eighth note is going to be 250 milliseconds. 16th note is going to be 125 milliseconds. If I go to something like 75 beats per minute, now a quarter note will be 800 milliseconds. Dotted eighth note will be 600 milliseconds. Eighth note will be 400 milliseconds. 16th note will be 200 milliseconds, so on and so forth. They also give a quick reference guide down here as well to how those settings would relate between milliseconds and the different types of notes. So a handy little tool. Thankfully on our Helix, we have a couple things that I'm sure most people know. Up in the corner here is the tempo we're dealing with, right? Right now I have mine at 92.7 because as I was preparing for this video with the backing track that I was going to play with, which I had no idea what tempo it was at. I just simply tempoed it in and I ended up at 92.7. Does that mean that's the perfect time for this backing track? No, maybe my tapping wasn't 100% accurate to a super high resolution, which is quite possible for anybody, right? But it's gonna be close enough for what we're doing here. If we do know the tempo of the song, we can simply just right click on this and enter whatever we need, right? So I believe I was at 92.7, simple enough. Now, if we go down to our delay, I'm using a preset here called Nashville. This is going to be available very soon on the Line 6 Marketplace. And I think you could probably guess what kind of style of music this is going to be used for. But it's some of my favorite sounds actually in this. And I'm going to have a cool video coming up soon for you guys to see, and that'll be available. But anyways, I use a simple delay. And if you notice the little clock here, right, we can switch between milliseconds, or we can switch between a musical note value. In this case, it's set to a quarter note. Anybody who's watched my videos in the past will notice that I pretty much always have it set to a note value. I never do the millisecond thing. I mean, I could go to that website and say, oh, I'm at 120 beats per minute. That means, you know, quarter note's going to be 500 milliseconds or whatever, and dial that in. But it's going to do the work for me. I can put the tempo up here. I can simply choose quarter note and I'm off to the races in seconds without even having to worry about any of that, okay? So for this case, I'm going to set it to quarter note. We have all sorts of choices: whole note, dotted half note, half note, triplet, half note. There's a lot of situations where we would want a very particular setting here, right? There's that really common kind of thing the edge does, right? Where the notes kind of ping pong around. A lot of times that's going to be like dotted eighths or dotted 16th note settings depending on the tempo, right? But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking here more about getting just a normal delay just to add some ambience to our sound to sit nicer in the mix and blend better, okay? So I've chosen a quarter note. I've gone with feedback of 16%, mix around 21%. But for this example, as I play along, I'm going to just up this to like, I don't know, maybe 37, 38%, just so we can really hear the effect of what's going on with the delay. All right. So what happens here is I can simply switch back and forth between having this set at a quarter note at 92 beats per minute or at 800 milliseconds. Okay, so if we take a look back at our website here, 800 milliseconds would actually be beats per minute of 75, which is going to be a little off from 92.7. So that'll be a good way to kind of just go back and forth to compare here. So I've pulled up a backing track I just had on file, which is from Jam Track Central, JTC. I can't remember the exact website. They make some great stuff. This is from a Guthrie Govan pack, and it's just a jam track to noodle over top of. So I'm gonna play around with this first of all, just so you can hear the backing track with this tone. And I'll have it set so that I'll put the tone and I'll tap tempo and just watch up here as I do that to see how this changes. You know what I'll do is I'll just set this at sort of the standard default 120. Okay, so here's the backing track, and then watch as I tap tempo this with my foot here. Okay, you saw it bounce around from 88, 92, 91, right? It takes a second to kind of lock it right in, but we're somewhere in the ballpark of 90 to 92. That 1 or 2 beats per minute is not going to make or break what we have going here, okay? First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to just go back to the 800 milliseconds. So this would be like having what did our BPM calculator tell us? Quarter note at 800 milliseconds. Sorry, a quarter note at 75 beats per minute would be the 800 milliseconds. Apparently I can't talk tonight. So this is going to be kind of like a lot of folks might do. Just dial in a certain millisecond that sounds good while they're just doing. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, sorry about how heavy it is in the delay. I've turned it up way higher than I would ever do normally, but just so you can hear that delay in the mix. That sounds fine like that because we're not really playing to a particular tempo, right? So I would, as I play along, I'm probably picking up on the tempo of the delay and you know, sort of changing my playing to match that. But what happens when we take that and we put it with a backing track that we know is more around the 90 beats per minute, whereas this is going to actually be more like the 75 beats per minute. Let me just play a little bit with this backing track and see what the impression is of how it sounds, okay? Okay, I actually find that hard to play with because that, especially with the delay that loud, it's really working against the groove of the song. I don't know if you guys noticed that. It might be a subtle thing for some. Some people might kind of go, it's good enough, right? But that really bothers me. It's a real pet peeve of mine. Things were not in time. Now let's switch that over so it's time-based to the quarter note of the song at my tapped-in tempo of 90.7, okay? Let's try the same thing. And I want you to listen to those echoes. Maybe I'll try to phrase it so you can hear those echoes and hear how they're timed with the relevant points of the music now, right? Quarter note, maybe it's going to fall where the snare drum falls. Maybe it's going to fall where the kick drum falls or where the hats are playing, right? So listen for that type of thing. Did you guys hear a difference? Things were timed with the beat. If I just simply go now, I'll put the backing track on and I'll just play kind of on the down beats, okay? Now let's do the same exercise, but switch this back over to where it would be equivalent to 75 beats per minute. I'm sorry, I just did the wrong thing there. Let's try that again. Did you hear how that had no correlation to the timing? It was not even like a dotted eighth half. It was just kind of off, right? So that would be, to me, just that would take away from whatever recording or live sound production we were doing. It would be almost a distraction to the listener. Now, mind you, yes, I have the mix of the delay a little bit louder than it probably should be, but some people do play like that, right? But I find even at a more normal setting, if I back this off to maybe 30%, let's say, or 29, 30%, let's say, and I go back to it being in time with the backing track, it's gonna just blend nicer. Now, if I take that same idea, go back at 800 milliseconds, even with the lower mix, and there I go again. Let's go back to my program here. Hear how it's off, like especially those ones where I stomp on a downbeat, it comes in at a very odd place. If I switch that back over, I'll try not to shut that delay off again. Okay, so you see how that just sits nicer in the mix. Did you guys hear it? I hope you did. To me, it's it's going to be a real feel thing too while you're playing it, right? Somebody who's not playing it might be able to kind of look past it, especially with the mix on the delay a little bit lower. Yeah, whatever. But as a player, to me, it's so important to me for that delay to be locked in to the point where if it's not, it throws me sometimes because I'm trying to phrase and get into, play with the groove of what the rhythm section is playing on the backing track or with the band. And I have this sort of alternate rhythmic thing happening with my delay, which just throws me for a loop. So this is something a lot of you folks are probably well aware of already, but it is a question that's come up before. And not even just posed as, should I set my tempo to, or my delay settings to a musical value, or should I use tap tempo? But more just as, why are my delays not sitting nicely in the mix, regardless of how loud or soft I have them? And the more I thought about it, the more I realize it probably has a lot to do with the fact that they're not locked into any sort of musical correlation, note value wise, to the music that's being played. So if you're finding a tough time with your delay, or if you just want to try this, if you aren't used to using it in this manner, I think you might find that things will work a little better for you. And in the long run, I think it'll just help. It's a small thing, but it'll help tweak our tone so that things just work nicer. So anyways, if it's something you already do, great. Sorry for wasting your time. But if it's not, you know, something that's very simple to do, right? We can all kind of tap that beat in, right? Depending on the tempo too, you might want to set that to a quarter note or an eighth note, half note, whatever. If it's a really fast tempo, you know, depending on what you want, there's going to be a lot of personal preference involved here. And some folks may just say, no, I don't need that. I'm just going to keep going about it the other way, right? And obviously, the lower we have that mix set on the delay, the less this becomes an issue, because the less we're going to hear that echo anyways. But something to think about. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really hope that helped somebody, even one or two people. Please like the video, share it if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out Marketplace. I have a few preset packs up there for sale. Have one based around Marshall amps, one based around Fender amps, one based around kind of more boutique amps, and this is going to be kind of a real cool country patch I got coming up very, very soon that I'll keep you guys posted about with a cool video to go along with it. But yeah, if you support me there, it helps me to keep doing these videos and helps out, and I really appreciate the support, guys, and all the kind words. So thank you guys again for tuning in. I'll be back soon with some more content, and for now, ciao.